Please remove those hats. You're in the Pabst Blue Ribbon Gateway Buick GMC Kings Court on 590 The Man.
And we welcome you back in. Kevin Slaten with you in the Pabst Blue Ribbon Gateway Buick GMC Kings Court. And yesterday, good news came down for all of us who have told the truth and defended honor with regard to the free report and the Penn State debacle. Penn State's postseason ban lifted immediately, as well as full scholarships returning next year. John Ziegler joins us from framingpaterno.com. John, this was a big piece of good news for people like yourself and me.
Yeah, it was. I mean, this has obviously been a bizarre journey that we've been on now, you, me, and some others for almost 3 years. I remember very well Franco Harris and myself and a couple of other supporters going to confront the president of the NCAA, Mark Emmert, almost 2 years ago here in Los Angeles. And to think, and by the way, you can find that at our website, framingpaterno.com, because it's really hilarious how utterly stupid and ignorant Mark Emmert was. That was the moment, by the way, Kevin, that I knew for sure, 100%, that I was right about the sanctions being ludicrous, because I thought for a second, well, maybe Emmert knew something that we didn't. Well, it was obvious Emmert's an idiot, and anybody who listens to this audio that we got during this confrontation between NFL Hall of Famer Franco Harris and Mark Emmert knows that to be obvious. But to come from that point, a little less than 2 years ago, to this point, where the NCAA is basically waving the white flag, is really extraordinary, especially when you consider the massive amount of mainstream news media that's still very much on the wrong side of this issue and was proven by their utterly ridiculous reaction to the NCAA's decision on removing most of the sanctions against Penn State. It's amazing. I mean, and you make no mistake, there are those in the media who will tell you that this has nothing to do with the factual record, this is not an exoneration of Penn State, that this is actually somehow bizarrely a vindication of Louis Freeh, that all Penn State is had done here is they're being rewarded for taking Freeh's recommendations so seriously. Kevin, as you know, as a lawyer, all you have to understand here is what are the chances the NCAA would ever make such a dramatic move if they thought there was any chance in the world that the three Penn State administrators still facing trial were ever going to be convicted? You know the answer to that question. There's zero chance the NCAA would do this because they would end up looking like complete idiots and destroying whatever great PR they got because they rushed to judgment and destroyed Penn State with this media hurricane behind them. If it then turned out later on that the Penn State administrators go to trial, they get found guilty on everything, it turns out there was really a cover-up at Penn State, and the sanctions are already gone, the NCAA has egg all over their face coming and going. They're not going to do that. The only reason they did this, the only reason why they waved the white flag is because they know the factual record is not on their side. They know the free report is not something that they can hinge their legal futures on. They know the lawsuits against them are valid. They want to try to take away all of the political cover for the Paterno family lawsuit and make it seem as if it's just about Joe Paterno's wins. Because that's all that's left to this lawsuit. But what they don't understand is, and I know this firsthand, and you do too, Kevin, the people who are on our side of this, the wins are simply symbolic. They are incredibly important, though, from a standpoint of admitting this was wrong and that Joe Paterno did nothing to deserve any of this. And so it was a big day. There's a lot more work to be done, but I just wish people, especially in the news media, would interpret it remotely in a logical or sensible manner. But, of course, that would be not in keeping with the rest of this whole bizarre story.
No, and I get a kick almost out of the feeble attempt by the NCAA to claim their reasoning for lifting the bans is a glowing report from George Mitchell that Penn State is somehow now putting academic integrity ahead of football. I mean, it's so laughable and so disgraceful that it's not funny. Penn State and Penn State alone was at the top of the integrity academically ladder in college football in this country. In fact, so far up there that the NCAA itself brought in other schools to witness how Penn State did it. And yet somehow now they're just getting it. And so since they're being good boys after we spank them, we'll go ahead and let them play after recess.
I extraordinarily well said, Kevin, but as usual, I'll go one step further, and that is what really bugs me about that whole line of thinking is that Penn State is essentially being rewarded for having pled guilty to things they didn't do and to have accepted their unjust punishments so well, basically saying, thank you, sir, may I have another?
Yeah.
The Penn State did that so well that now they're being rewarded because they were such good boys, as you put it, to accept punishments they didn't deserve, plead guilty to things they didn't do, throw other people under the bus that were no longer with the university at that time or were dead at that time, like Joe Paterno. I actually think the only thing Penn State deserves punishment for is everything that the administration did after Joe Paterno got fired or just before he got fired. That's what they deserve punishment for.
I think I believe
I still haven't figured out what the hell Penn State did wrong prior to November 5th of 2011 when the Jerry Sandusky story really broke nationally and Jerry Sandusky was arrested. I mean, there are a couple of minor things Penn State could have done differently to protect themselves in a better fashion, and I still haven't figured out one thing Penn State has done correctly after, say, November 8th or 7th of 2011 when they got rid of Graham Spanier and Joe Paterno, and yet here they are allegedly being rewarded. But, of course, this whole story, Kevin, I keep saying this, is upside down. Everybody that deserves criticism has actually been praised, and everybody who has been praised actually deserves criticism. Everything is upside down. It's Alice in Wonderland. Yeah. And the NCAA decision yesterday and the media reaction to it is a perfect example of that. And, of course, ESPN is continuing to spin this bizarre, illogical, disproven cover-up narrative. In fact, Joey Galloway, former NFL player, former Ohio State player, was on ESPN spouting ridiculous lies. I went after him on Twitter for a good hour. He and I went after each other yesterday. He couldn't even answer a basic frickin' question. Even when I offered him $10,000 to his favorite charity if he could tell me one thing, which was give me the name or identify the victim, whoever said that they were sexually abused and that Penn State knew about it. Just give me that person's name or identify who they are. And, of course, it took him 45 minutes to an hour to realize he can't answer the question because that person doesn't exist. Nobody's in that category. Yet the continual narrative is, oh, if Penn State had just done more, somebody would not have been abused, and therefore they deserve their punishment. Well, that's a completely false narrative on every possible level, and ESPN and Stephen A. Smith did the same thing again today, continuing this false bullcrap narrative for which there is no evidence nor logic.
Well, anytime you have Joey Galloway and Stephen A. Smith as your frontmen, you are a pathetic excuse for a journalistic operation, which we already knew ESPN was. Here's the other thing, though. I believe Rodney Erickson should be in jail. I believe he belongs there for crimes against Penn State and against the Paterno family and Joe Paterno specifically. I also believe that this lawsuit isn't going anywhere, no matter how the NCAA tries to make it go away. It isn't going away, and here's why. The people who filed this lawsuit, the Paternos, the faculty members, the former players, the trustees, they want Louis Freeh and Mark Emmert under oath in a deposition. And it's my strong belief that until that happens, none of the narrative will even remotely change. It'll always be this BS spinning by the NCAA that somehow Penn State became good little children and listened to us, and we're such kind parents that we're rewarding them. Until the depositions of those two scoundrels, those scalawags, those lowlife slumdogs are taken under oath, then nothing will change.
You're exactly right, and I'm curious about your opinion legally, Kevin, and as a lawyer, what do you think is going to happen here? Because I've always maintained this is going to be a fascinating situation. We kind of have the unstoppable object against the irresistible force here, because I believe the entire paternal lawsuit will come down to just one word: sorry. Will the NCAA apologize? Because I can't see the Paterno family and others accepting a settlement without the words, we're sorry. I can't believe that the NCAA will actually do that, but I also know the NCAA is never going to allow Mark Emmert or Louis Freeh to go under oath in a deposition. They're never going to go through full discovery because they're going to get slaughtered. So I'm curious as to, who's going to budge there? Who will blink? Because I can't see either side blinking. And I honestly don't know what's going to end up happening there. I am sure that some way, shape, or form, Joe Paterno's wins will be restored. In fact, you know what convinced me? What was last night watching 5,000 Penn State students organically coming to Beaver Stadium. I don't know if you saw this or not.
I did.
But it's unbelievable. I mean, this is for people who follow the story. This was the most shocking thing I've seen in the entire story. You can see it at framingpaterno.com because I thought the students had totally caved in, that they had basically become wussified, and that they didn't care, and they're too young to even remember Joe Paterno. I mean, to see them chanting 409, his number of wins that he ought to have, and to chant his name in a spontaneous rally outside of Beaver Stadium last night was stirring. I mean, I got chills watching it, and to me that showed, you know what, it may take 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. This thing is going to get corrected on Joe Paterno's level because at least those kids are all 18, 19, 20, 21 years old. They're going to be around for another 50, 60 years.
Right.
So they'll be able to get it done. I've always been concerned that the people who understood this story were too old and we're all going to die off. But I'm curious, Kevin, what do you think on that sorry issue? Who's going to budge on that?
Well, here's what I've been told by people involved in the lawsuit, and I believe this. There isn't any way Mark Emmert's going to avoid a deposition. No way. Freeh is trying his damnedest to avoid a deposition, going so far as to just crash into a tree so they could be in a hospital and not have to answer questions. I'm almost to the point where I believe that was intentional on his part, just to avoid going under oath in a deposition. But be that as it may, he's going to try to pull everything he can from his federal bench career, his FBI career, to avoid having to testify. Now, think about that. The guy who once headed the FBI is going to try to do everything in his power to avoid telling the truth under oath. He's going to do a federal judge is going to do everything in his power to avoid having to be questioned. Imagine this. It's so pathetic. And yet ESPN sits by, and now we've got Ray Rice to talk about. Why should we talk about Louis Freeh? He's the FBI director, former federal judge. But I don't believe for 1 second that those two avoid depositions in discovery because the judge ain't under their control.
Well, I would like to believe you're correct. And just to augment your point there, to me, and I've actually done a lousy job of emphasizing this point, because there's so many other things I've had to get to over the last couple of years. But how is it that Louis Freeh and Mark Emmert ever dodged media criticism for not accepting Bob Costas' invitation to be interviewed about this? I mean, you dodge Bob Costas, and you get no media blowback?
Nothing.
I mean, none. Zero.
Not even.
Zero.
Not even. By the way, from Bob's own network at NBC. Nothing.
Right.
Nothing from the Matt Lauers. Nothing from Brian Williams. Nothing. Nothing at all from Bob's own network. And he made that offer to both of them, and they both cowardly ran with their tails between their legs. John, I'm telling you, if you've got nothing to hide, if all of that report was accurate, you would be the first guy, if you wrote it, to want to say, here's why it's accurate.
By the way, it's part of Freeh's contract for him to answer questions from the Board of Trustees at Penn State, which he's never done. I mean, and you're exactly right. I mean, if you're Louis Freeh, you're of course going to want to talk about this if you're confident in your findings, but he doesn't want to talk about it because he can't, because his findings make no sense. They've been disproven. The logic behind them doesn't exist. There was no cover-up at Penn State, and I maintain, not only is there no evidence of a cover-up, there's no logic behind it because I don't believe there was very much of anything to cover up.
No.
And so the reality here is this entire narrative is false, but what we're seeing in the reaction to the media, especially the ESPN, to the dropping of the NCAA sanctions against Penn State, is frankly desperation. We're seeing desperation on their part that their narrative has fallen apart, and now they have to live in this alternative universe where nothing has happened since November 9th of 2011.
Yeah.
I mean, almost literally.
But isn't it?
And therefore, what they misreported is somehow still true. When those like you and I who have followed this and learned what crap the whole thing was, know that that's just false. But unfortunately, the truth doesn't matter. It's all about protecting yourself.
Isn't it funny? And it's funny to me, and yet it's also insulting at the same time to any logical, smart-thinking person that the NCAA wants you to believe that they're dropping these sanctions because of the Penn State turnaround and being good boys, and yet has nothing to do with lawsuits filed against them as they get ready to be deposed. It has nothing to do. The timing has nothing to do with that.
By the way, it also has nothing to do with, and I'm not a conspiracy guy, but how convenient is it from a football perspective, Kevin, that the bowl ban gets dropped the weekend after it becomes patently obvious that the Big Ten Conference is in disarray. They're going to have trouble even filling all of their bowl slots because the conference sucks so bad. And now here they're going to have 10. By the way, I don't know if you know this. This is amazing. So Penn State, if they become bowl eligible, which they will because their schedule is so incredibly weak and the conference is so terrible, if they become eligible, this is what they're going to be asking Penn State to do. Pay your own way to a bowl because you're not going to get any of the conference bowl revenue because that bowl revenue is going to be split between all the other schools. So now you're going to have, and by the way, bring your 30,000 fan base that's chomping at the bit to go to a bowl game. So, gee, I wonder how the economics worked out on that decision.
Yeah. By the way, you mentioned economics. The $60 million fine now has also been conceded by the NCAA to the state of Pennsylvania to keep the money inside the state. Now, I don't know all of the particulars about that, but my guess is if it's up to the state how to distribute it, why would the state not simply distribute it right back to Penn State?
Well, no, but the key point of that whole deal is the NCAA waved the white flag on that lawsuit brought by Penn State, or not by Penn State, by Pennsylvania state legislatures. The reason why the NCAA waved the white flag there, Kevin, is same reason. They didn't want discovery.
Right.
Because the lawsuit wanted to litigate the free report. And so they dropped it. So they said, go ahead and spend the money in Pennsylvania. We're fine with that. It's desperation on the part of the NCAA. And unfortunately, I think they have at least so far calculated properly that the media will carry their water for them on this. Because the media is buying in to this ridiculous narrative that because Penn State has done such a great job of cleaning things up, we're going to, by the way, this was not a minor reduction in the sanctions. I mean, the sanctions have essentially been cut at least in half, if not more than that, depending on how you interpret it, from what they were 2 years ago. It's an absurdity. I want to emphasize this one more time. If the NCAA thought there was any chance that those 3 Penn State administrators were going to be convicted at a trial, they would never do this.
No.
Because they would end up looking like imbeciles.
No.
And of course, the reason is they know there's not going to be a conviction because there was no cover-up.
Now and yet they destroyed the careers of those 3 very highly respectable people, including Graham Spanier, the president of the university, who was himself a victim of child abuse when he was young. Let's switch to the media coverage of Ray Rice. This is the most preposterous development I've ever seen in my life. This is a guy who has gone through the criminal justice system, has agreed to whatever punishment, quote unquote, they meted out, which was virtually nothing except attending a class. Then he reaches an agreement with the NFL. All parties sign off on both deals. That's the end of it. Now, absent any new evidence, they've decided, Roger Goodell has, well, you know what? We don't like that agreement. It made me look bad. Now you're done. This is the most preposterous thing I've ever seen. think about it in real life. If you make a deal with a realtor to buy a new house, and a couple of weeks after you move in, the old owner says, you know what, I didn't get enough money from you. I want more. Deal's off. That's what this is. It's the most absurd thing I've ever seen, and I have to believe, even as weak as the NFL Players Association is, they will scream bloody murder on this and file an appeal, and they will win so long as Roger Goodell is not the ultimate arbiter in this. This is unconscionable behavior on the part of the NFL. Unconscionable. I
totally get what you're saying, but I'm going to differ with you a little bit, okay? And that is that I'm trying to figure out a logical progression for how this thing happened. And it sounds like you're presuming that the NFL already saw the full tape, including what we saw yesterday. Now, if that's the case, you're 1,000% right. I'm not sure I'm buying that yet. And I realize it sounds ludicrous that they didn't see the tape. I get that. But it's less ludicrous to me at this point, based upon what we know, that they didn't see it than if they did see it. Because think about this, Kevin, and this has some similarities to the Penn State situation, because now everyone's claiming cover-up. Keith Olbermann and Deadspin are all over this. By the way, that automatically makes me suspicious. When Keith Olbermann and Deadspin are the two people most outspoken that something happened, I automatically presume, okay, it didn't happen, because I don't have trust for either of them, and I don't trust TMZ either, because I've been screwed myself by TMZ. So as much as I dislike Roger Goodell, I hate the NFL. I think it's destroying football. I am not convinced that they're not telling the truth today about not knowing that they were not seeing this other video. Let me tell you why I believe this. Not only would it have been colossally stupid for them to do what they did after having seen the video that came out yesterday, but I'm just looking at this from the standpoint of, okay, what would a cover-up really look like? And tell me what you think of this, Kevin. Let's pretend the NFL saw the video, said, you know what, screw it. This is horrible, but we're only going to give them 2 games for no apparent reason. And we're just going to hope that this video never comes out. And then it comes out, and the world explodes. I maintain that the NFL did not have simply enough time between the time that the video comes out yesterday to the time that they declare Ray Rice ineligible indefinitely, essentially ending his career. I don't believe there was enough time for the NFL to get all of their ducks in a row to make sure everybody was on board, that everybody that knew that there was a videotape was somehow locked down, that every email that was potentially sent about this had been deleted or found, or at every possible angle, that the people at the security company, at the casino, couldn't possibly prove that the NFL had seen the tape. There wasn't enough time, Kevin. Do you follow what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, I don't. Here's why I disagree. There is, if you believe that the NFL did not see that video before yesterday, I've got some land to sell you that's underwater down in Florida.
I know it sounds ridiculous, but it's the only thing that makes any sense.
No, it doesn't. And here's why. The NFL is so ungodly arrogant that they believe that what they say is accepted, and it's accepted by the media, the mainstream media, because all of the mainstream media is in their bed. And so the mainstream media does what daddy tells them to do. And that's how this was covered originally. Now, because people were screaming about it, and now the video surfaces, everybody's really screaming about it. The NFL lied in their PR release saying that this was an investigation by the New Jersey State Police, which had jurisdiction over casino investigations. They had the tape, and they wouldn't give it to us. Now, the New Jersey State Police, unfortunately for the NFL, immediately issued a statement saying the NFL is lying. We never had the tape. We didn't do the investigation. It's not our jurisdiction. We only investigate casino floor instances. This was the Atlantic City Police, and the NFL could have easily had access to the tape. If Chris Carter of ESPN saw this tape, if the Associated Press saw this tape, no one can convince me the NFL did not see it, and they simply felt that there would not be a big storm because there's never any pushback against what they do.
Kevin, what you're saying is possibly true. I'm not 100% sure on this yet. I don't think we have enough information. But what I'm telling you is that if let me put it this way, if they saw that tape and they reacted the way that they did and put out the statements that they did, and frankly, I don't think there's much relevance necessarily to the New Jersey State Police coming out and saying it was inaccurate what the NFL said, because that to me sounds like something's very plausible in a situation where the NFL is just incompetent and doesn't even know who the hell's in charge of what, which would be consistent with them never having seen the tape because they were just stupid and incompetent. That doesn't sound like a cover-up to me. If that was a cover-up, they would get their I's dotted and their T's crossed. So I still maintain, if in fact this was a cover-up, this was the dumbest, worst executed, most colossally arrogant cover-up I've ever seen in my life. Now, is that possible? Sure.
Wait a minute.
Everything you just talked about with regard to the arrogance in the NFL and their belief that the media was going to carry their water no matter what they did is 100% true. I get that. But I am yet to be convinced that there's a scenario that makes I want to make something very clear. No scenario makes sense here.
All right. Well, let me explain it to you here.
The scenario that makes the least is the most understandable and has the least problems is just pure incompetence on the part of the NFL, and not an actual cover-up. I don't believe currently, gun to my head, I don't believe Roger Goodell saw that videotape before he made that decision.
Understand this. You said this would be the dumbest cover-up in the history of cover-ups. Every cover-up is performed by dumb, arrogant people. That's why they get exposed. That's why they get caught. The Nixon administration, the most famous one, those were not people that you would ever have suspected would conduct a cover-up, but they did. And they did it to the highest levels of government. Their arrogance and their belief that the media and people would never question them is how they think they can cover something up. And the NFL owns all of the media outlets. They're business partners with all of the media outlets, and that's their thought process. They never questioned us before. They won't question us again, and we'll do whatever we please. And the arrogance and stupidity of the NFL is unquestioned.
Well, but let's see what happens. I'm willing to, again, I'm not in the 100% range. I'm in the 60 to 70% range. That I don't think that there's an overt cover up here. But you know what? I'm also concerned about. I'm curious about what your thoughts are on. How about Ray Rice's wife and her statement that came out today, blasting the media for their coverage of this? A lot of the coverage I saw yesterday was about standing up for her and, oh, poor Janae, and this is horrible. And obviously it was horrible to what happened to her. But how did what happened yesterday help her at all? It makes her go through it again. It humiliates her publicly, and it destroys her husband's ability to make a living. How exactly did she get helped by the media coverage of yesterday's Ray Rice video?
Well, the media
you have an answer on that?
The media doesn't care. They don't care if they help somebody. They're out to destroy people. That's what TMZ lives to do, is destroy people's lives. These people have already gone through the process, the criminal process, the NFL suspension hearing and process, and TMZ and people of their ilk do not care. This was not news. This wasn't new. Are you trying to convince me that the NFL issued a 2-game suspension having any doubt as to what took place in that elevator?
Well, let me ask you one other question on that, though, Kevin. Let's presume you're right. Right? And the NFL saw the video, which means Ray Rice's lawyers know the NFL saw the video. Does that not give Ray Rice an unbelievable lawsuit against the NFL for essentially double jeopardy, for lack of a better term, because they changed the punishment with no new evidence?
Well,
why would they do that?
First of all, let's wait and see what happens legally. The first step is going to come from the Players Association. We'll see what they do. They don't have a spine to begin with, so they may do nothing. However, even DeMaurice Smith has to scream from the highest mountain on this one.
He's not going to, and I think it's going to be a huge mistake on his part, because here's what's going to happen. If this stands as it is, every NFL player now needs to be frightened of their wives and their girlfriends, because they now have a weapon against them, because any accusation is going to be like Jerry Sandusky. Everything will be believed, no matter what. In fact, even if your wife defends you now, the media has set the precedent and the predicate that that's a sign that you're guilty.
Well, but that's not
what they
true.
were saying about today.
That's not true.
The NFL Players Association, if they don't raise hell about this, and I don't think they will, because I think they lost their balls on it, I think that they have set up a situation where there's going to be an epidemic of false claims or potentially false claims against NFL players, or at the very least, this is going to be a field day for the change in the power structure of NFL marriages and relationships.
Well, it's not true, because you've got a guy playing for the Carolina Panthers right now who was convicted of this. Convicted, not a probation. He got a conviction, and he's playing NFL football. So the players don't have to fear what the players have to that. What the players have to fear is this, that no matter what suspension they're given for any offense, that suspension might not hold any water, because in a couple of weeks, Roger Goodell may change his mind, and he may want to make it worse. That's what players have to fear. Well, they already hate Goodell. Now they have to fear that Goodell is a clown act and a fraud and will change suspensions whichever way the wind blows. Hey, John, real quickly, one last point, and then we got to go.
Yeah, and I just that last point is most important. We now live in a world where ESPN is the judge, the jury, and the executioner. And people at ESPN don't have a frickin' clue about facts, law, logic, or anything. And that's dangerous. Whether it's Penn State, Ray Rice, no matter what the situation is, that's the world we're now living in, because everything has to be done today because our attention spans are too short, and it's very, very troubling.
I think we've been in that world for a while, as we all know, with ESPN. Hey, John, great stuff as always, folks. FramingPaterno.com. Go check it out. That's the website of record for all that's true with regarding the Penn State situation for the last few years. Thanks, John.
Thanks, Kevin.
All right, folks, this is the Pabst Blue Ribbon Gateway Buick GMC Kings Court. We're going to catch up on a break, and we're coming back with Chet Pleben right after this.
Rebel.